What if I told you that everything you learned about slavery in school was just a fraction of the story? The neat little chapters in our history books often focused on one specific period, one specific trade, have given us a sanitized and incomplete picture of a global institution that has shaped humanity for millennia. We're often taught that slavery was a dark chapter of the past, primarily centered on the transatlantic slave trade. But the truth is so much bigger, more complex, and frankly, more shocking. It wasn't just one race enslaving another. It was a practice that crisscrossed continents, cultures, and centuries, long before the first ships crossed the Atlantic, and long after. So, buckle up, because today we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the vast, uncomfortable, and hidden history of human enslavement. We're going to challenge everything you thought you knew. Let's start by rewinding the clock, way back before the 15th century. Slavery wasn't an invention of the colonial era. It was a brutal fact of life in ancient civilizations, from the Roman Empire, which ran on the backs of millions of enslaved people from across Europe and the Near East, to the great empires of China and India. In the medieval Islamic world, vast slave trades stretched from West Africa, across the Sahara, and from Eastern Europe down to the Middle East. The Vikings were notorious slavers, raiding the coasts of Britain and Europe, capturing people to be sold in markets as far away as Constantinople. What's crucial to understand is that for most of history, slavery was not primarily based on race. It was about power, conquest, and misfortune. If your city was conquered, if you fell into debt, or if you were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, you could be enslaved, regardless of your skin color or origin. This was the grim reality for countless millions long before the transatlantic trade even began. Now, let's talk about something you almost certainly never heard about in school: the Barbary slave trade. For centuries, from roughly the 16th to the 19th, pirates and corsairs from the Barbary Coast of North Africa, what is now Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, and liberated the coastlines of Europe. They didn't just attack ships. They sailed right into coastal towns in Italy, Spain, France, England, and even as far as Ireland and Iceland, capturing men, women, and children. It is estimated that over 1 million Europeans were captured and sold into slavery in North Africa during this period. These weren't just sailors. They were fishermen, farmers, and entire village populations. They were forced into hard labor, served in the households of the wealthy, or, for the women, often ended up inheriting. The American government's first foreign war, the Barbary Wars, was fought over this very issue to stop American ships from being attacked and their crews enslaved. This history doesn't diminish the horrors of the transatlantic trade in any way. Instead, it adds a crucial layer of complexity, showing that the roles of an enslaved were, tragically, roles played by different peoples at different times throughout history. So how did this ancient global practice of slavery fuel the world we live in today? The answer lies in the foundations of modern capitalism. When European powers began colonizing the Americas, they found vast lands rich with resources like sugar, cotton, and tobacco. But these were labor-intensive crops. The solution? An industrial-scale, racially-based system of chattel slavery that was unlike anything the world had seen before. The transatlantic slave trade became the engine of the global economy. the labor of millions of enslaved Africans, treated not as humans but as property, generated immense fortunes. This wealth didn't just stay on the plantations, it flowed back to Europe, funding the Industrial Revolution. The profits from sugar and cotton built banks in London, funded shipyards in Liverpool, and financed factories in Manchester. Insurance companies, like the famous Lloyd's of London, got their start by insuring slave ships. The very fabric of Western finance, industry, and consumer culture was woven with threads spun from the brutal exploitation of enslaved people. Modern capitalism wasn't just assisted by slavery. For a crucial period, it was built by it. Now for the final and perhaps most cynical part of this story, the abolition of slavery. We love the triumphant moral narrative that enlightened people finally realized slavery was wrong and fought to end it. And while the moral arguments of abolitionists were real and incredibly brave, the story from the perspective of the world's most powerful empire at the time, Great Britain, is far more economic. By the early 19th century, the British Empire was shifting. The Industrial Revolution, which slavery had helped to finance, was creating a new economic model based on wage labor and industrial manufacturing. The plantation economy, based on slavery, was starting to look inefficient and less profitable compared to the factories at home. Britain realized it could dominate the world more effectively through industrial might and free trade, a system where they could sell their manufactured goods everywhere. So, in 1833, when Britain abolished slavery in its colonies, was it a purely moral act? Well, they also paid out a massive compensation package, the equivalent of billions of dollars today. But this money didn't go to the formerly enslaved people for their lifetimes of stolen labor. No, it went to the slave owners as compensation for losing their property. In fact, the British government took out such a large loan to pay the slave owners that it was only fully paid off by British taxpayers in 2015. So, Britain's abolition was, in many ways, a strategic pivot. By championing abolition globally and using its powerful navy to enforce it, Britain could disrupt the economies of its rivals, like Brazil and Cuba, who still relied on enslaved labor, while simultaneously positioning itself as the moral leader of the world and opening new markets for its industrial goods. It was one of the most successful and cynical rebranding campaigns in history. So, where does this leave us? Understanding this larger, more complex history of slavery is not about creating a way to contests or diminishing the unique horrors of the transatlantic trade. Its scale, its racial ideology, and its generational impact were truly catastrophic. But by seeing slavery in its full global and historical context, we can begin to understand it not as an isolated event, but as a deeply ingrained human failing temptation of power that has seduced societies all over the world for thousands of years. It forces us to ask tougher questions. It challenges simple narratives of good guys and bad guys and shows how economics and power, more than morality, have so often driven history. This hidden history is uncomfortable, but it's essential, because if we don't understand the true, complex roots of how our world was built, we can never truly hope to build a more just one in the future. Thanks for watching, and if this made you think, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives into the history you weren't taught in school.